I was a freshman at North Carolina State University, and my husband Joe was a senior. I was not Catholic at the time, and we met because he was a resident advisor in the building adjacent to mine.
I was actively at that point starting to think about discerning the priesthood. Well, the funny thing is that semester I kept trying to make discernment meetings once a month, and I kept trying to make those, but there kept being conflicts going through my senior year, and I wasn't really interested at the time in a serious relationship. And then being sort of a person in charge of the residence halls, there's also that piece where you're not really supposed to date residents of the residence hall. So someone else that had a crush on me at the time, and I was kind of like, well, I'm sorry, but I don't really date residents, and sort of put the kibosh on that. But then Mandy and I, we just kept seeing each other. There kept being different conversations. We went out to coffee one night, but it ended up turning into a milkshake because coffee shop was closed.
Yeah.
They didn't live the college lifestyle, I suppose. But we went and we had a great time, and it just became apparent as the time went on that we had very strong feelings and emotions for each other.
What happened after your milkshake date?
It was still kind of a complicated situation. So we weren't formally dating at that point.
That's right.
It was more just like hanging out. And then it got kind of complicated because I didn't know if I wanted to date a resident or not. Eventually, over, I believe it was Thanksgiving, I called Mandy and I was having some conversations with my family and asked her if she wanted to date me. And
Yeah.
I remember the first date we ever had. It was more of a formal date. It was actually a double date with one of her friends. And it was the most bizarre date ever because her friend had met some guy online and was like, hey, I don't want to go on a date with him by myself. Can we do like a double date thing? So we were like, okay.
Yeah, we started out the date with Joe and I dressing alike unintentionally. He had on a red and white striped sweater, and I had on a red and white striped sweater. And it was so obvious that when we got to the restaurant, the waiter commented on it. And then, unfortunately, my friend's date was not so great. He sat there and didn't really talk. But I mean, it was good because Joe's a very talkative person, and so he made the best of it.
Well, no, the best part of it, though, was Mandy's friend had actually decided to meet the guy before they went on the date. And immediately she decided she didn't want to date this guy.
Oh my goodness, yeah. She told us none of this until after.
Yes. And so she still decided to keep the double date on.
Yeah.
So the entire time, the guy was looking kind of awkwardly, kind of hurt. I was trying to make conversation with him, and Mandy and her friend were making conversation with each other.
Yeah.
And then we ended up, it was dinner and a movie. So at the movie theater, though, it was that guy, me, then Mandy, and Mandy's friend sort of sitting in that arrangement. Just to give you a
The
further.
amazing part is he came from the restaurant to the theater with us.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was our first official date. You're just trying to figure each other out, right? And so, we would spend time together going to coffee shops and meeting up after class and just having conversations. Yeah, I'd say one of the first conversations we had actually was about God. It wasn't really something we intended, but Joe being in campus ministry there at NC State, it was one of those things where I had just left my non-denominational church and I'd never really had a conversation with a Catholic before. So I just kind of wanted to get a sense of what, his relationship with God was like and just get some parameters and understanding about how he had a relationship with Jesus.
I had also gotten very involved in different interdenominational type ministries like InterVarsity, and even done some mission trips with the Southern Baptist Church within sort of the campus community. And for me at that point in my faith walk and my faith journey, it was more important for me to find someone that would challenge me, help me to grow in my own faith rather than someone who was simply nominally Catholic. Tell her about the first time you went to Mass.
Oh, yeah. Were we dating at that point?
Maybe.
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
But so they held Mass on campus at this large audience hall. And so I had no concept of what I was going into. But we were going as a group of friends, and this other friend of mine had told me not to do anything in the Mass. And I said, okay, I can do nothing. I can just observe. And so I went, and Joe was on my left and my friend was on my right. And I sat the whole Mass. I didn't stand. I didn't say any of the prayers, even though I knew a couple of them. I didn't go up for a blessing, nothing. And afterwards, Joe was he was a little upset, and he was like, well, why didn't you do anything? And I said, well, I really thought, I was told not to do a single thing for Mass. But later I found out that wasn't the case. And it kind of piqued my interest, just this idea of what the Mass was and why all these people were doing these different things and saying these different prayers and what it all meant. And so that really started a conversation for us.
Why did you want to go to Mass?
I was invited. And I think a lot of times people disregard that simple invite and how powerful it can be. And then, as I guess young couples do, we decided maybe we didn't want to be so serious.
When you're that age, everything feels traumatic. So anyway, over the summer, we were still dating. I decided I'd stay around campus for another year and do sort of a junior campus minister experience. And so Mandy was visiting a friend in Germany, and this was the summer after Hurricane Katrina hit the United States. There was a lot of damage in New Orleans. And so that summer, they offered these camps in New Orleans for young adults to go and build housing and help to do Hurricane Katrina recovery. And so I went on this experience, and on that experience, I had a lot of adults that were there affirming this sense that you're a great Catholic guy. You really called to the priesthood. Have you ever thought of the priesthood? And I was like, well, I'm dating someone. And they were like, oh, well, you're dating, you're not married, so, you should be a priest. So after the camp, I get back, and Mandy's coming back from Germany, and I decide I'm going to pick her up from the airport and tell her promptly that, you know what, Mandy, I've enjoyed this relationship, but I think I'm called to be a priest. I brought her flowers and took her to the campus ministry center and promptly told her, and then we both bawled for about 2 hours.
Yeah.
Me thinking she wasn't Catholic at the time, I thought she'd go running the other way. But in some ways, she kind of clung harder. So it was kind of like, okay, well, maybe God's calling me to the priesthood. Maybe he's not. Let's spend some time thinking about this. But I think I'm going to be discerning for the priesthood. So we had this 3-month period that was miserable where, like, you can't really fully commit yourself to someone if you think they may leave you for something later, right? So we went through that tenuous 3-month period. And at the end of it, I was waiting for that burning bush moment. And it never came.
Mm-mm.
But I do want to see what God wants for this relationship. So, Mandy, I'm willing to commit myself fully to this relationship. And that was promptly when she said to me, well, Joe, I don't know if I'm ready for a serious relationship. I think I want to date other people.
I think I was tired of it all at the time.
She was tired of it all.
It was just a lot of emotion,
And I was like, wait, who else do you want to date? And she's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
So that began another 3-month
Oh
period
my goodness.
of miserableness where we were both kind of like dating, but not fully committing to each other and very miserable.
Yeah.
And so we drove to the zoo one day that was about an hour and a half from the campus. We did not plan this out well.
Because we drove together.
Yes. And we were outside of a flamingo exhibit, and we sat down on a bench, and we both were talking about how miserable we are, and decided, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't be dating. Maybe we should break up.
Yep. So we did.
Yep.
Then we drove back together.
Hour and a half back. And I told my priest when I got back, and he was like, oh, be quiet. You guys aren't breaking up. And then that night, Mandy called me and was like, well, Joe, I think we made a mistake. And I'm like, no, 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 no. We need to give it more time. I agree, but I think we need to give it more time. And gave it another 2 nights, I think. And after that, we got back together for good.
Yeah. It was a lot. But I think in some ways it helped clarify why we were still choosing each other. It's because there was a lot of things that we connected on, and it just felt like there were outside circumstances that were trying to impose, and we just had to make a decision if we were going to actually choose one another or not. And I think at that point I was 19. I'm like, do I really need to be stuck in one relationship where the guy can't commit? So I, at that point, had said, well, maybe we should date other people. And then there was this 3-month period again where it was just, well, if we're going to date other people, then let's do that, but maybe not. And we just couldn't make up our minds. Well, then you got that scholarship to that theology union in DC.
Mandy was in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I ended up going to pursue a Master's of Divinity at a small Catholic school of theology in Washington, D.C. So about a 6-hour car drive. We decided we would commit to sort of a long-term relationship with each other.
Yeah, so we did that for 2 years.
And every other weekend, one of us would either take the train or drive back and forth to visit with each other. I think over that time, just it was one of those things that sort of, I think, helped us grow stronger together.
I did not become Catholic until we had been married for 2 years. So that story involves very much a wrestling on my end, because Joe had told me once we got engaged, like, look, I'm not going to expect you to become Catholic. You have to decide that on your own. That's between you and God. So, it was very much my journey to decide whether or not I was going to take that leap of faith. We ended up going on a hike. I kind of had a feeling, and we went through this path, and there was a snake in the path, so we had to clear the snake out of the path. And then we walked up some rocks, and Joe found this little spot, that kind of ledge, and he pulled out these plastic cups and a bottle. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's not what you normally bring on a hike. And then we're talking. Next thing I know, he's fumbling with his pocket a little bit, and he hops down on one knee, and he asks me if I'll marry him. And I said, why, yes, I will. And then we finished the bottle of wine. We carved our names in a tree nearby and a heart. And then we hiked back to the car. It was just very low key. It was just between us. It was very sweet. We were having a conversation at a Chinese restaurant. And I remember Joe saying to me very clearly, he's like, my wife, I will treat like she is the most important person, and I will make sure that her priorities are my priorities, and I will make sure I lead our family, and I will take care of our family. And he laid out in pretty clear terms how he was going to be a husband and how he would be a dad and what he wanted his family to look like. And I had not heard other guys talking that way. And so when he finally did decide to propose, I knew he was the type of person that no matter what we went through, he would be a solid rock, and that he would be someone that I could always lean on and trust. And that's proven to be true. So our oldest son has a condition called cerebral palsy. And when you're new parents, you don't always expect that to be your first experience parenting. But speaking of how Joe is such a solid rock, he has turned out to be the type of dad that he's like, okay, so he has this condition. We're going to do everything we can to help him live the life he wants to live. And that type of person that's like, that's not going to knock me down. That's not going to keep me down. Like, that's one of the qualities that I didn't see in Joe right away that has been such a beautiful surprise in our marriage and in our family life. And I think it's been such a huge blessing, too.
And I'd say there's two things over the journey of marriage that have been interesting to me. One has been, she is such a great advocate. We talked a little bit about Jacob's cerebral palsy, but just how I've been sort of, okay, well, we'll make do with things. Mandy's always been sort of that advocate for him to sort of find and dig in and do research and find out about options and possibilities that I, for one, never knew were possible. Whether it's particular surgeries for Jacob that could help him have better lifestyle and better long-term results, or different types of interventions and camps. And I think that's been meaningful. The other thing that has been interesting to me, and I think has been very meaningful, is how Mandy's faith has, I feel like as she's become a mother, it's become even more intentional, because I think she's really wrestled with that question in a very meaningful way of, how am I going to pass this faith on to our family and our children? And so I think that's kind of what's led her toward a lot of her reflections and spirituality around her Catholic faith and family life. In particular, the way she's been very intentional from a liturgical living standpoint of thinking about how do we integrate in celebrations of all saints in a meaningful way to our family? How do we really observe as a family things like Lent and Advent and other things? And challenging me, I think, at times to be more intentional about those implementations as well. I think she's helped me grow as a father and a husband in that regard, too. People talk about the most challenging year is going to be year 3, 7, whatever it might be. I feel like the thing is, Mandy and I, at times, we've had challenges and difficulties, but I think we have always had this sincere desire to love and support one another, that we can get flustered and angry with one another, but that afterwards we come back together, right? That's been an important marker for who we are. We're very relational people. We love relationships with our community and one another. At times we have had not disagreements over church teaching or anything like that, but sometimes around sort of how we express ourselves from a faith perspective. And the important thing, I think, over time is that we haven't allowed that to divide us, but instead I feel like allow us to challenge one another, to grow in our faith and to grow, I think, in our ability to demonstrate that faith to our children.
Yeah. And I would just add too that marriage is hard. It's a lot of work, but just approaching each other with a posture of love and goodwill goes a long way. Whether you're having those disagreements or you're having a bad day, or like the kids have been screaming at you for 6 hours and you're just over it and you really just need a break, and your husband comes home, approaching each other in a posture of love and kind of meeting them where they're at just goes a long way in every situation.
Thank you for listening. If you would like to get a list of categorized Catholic podcasts, head over to the website, which is linked below, and enter your email address to get it sent straight to your inbox.